Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's really heartwarming to see such a great audience. Really welcome to all of you. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you to this edition of the Global Thinkers Series, organized by the Asia Global Institute at the University of Hong Kong. As you all know, and there are many familiar faces in the audience, the precursor to this was the Fung Global Institute, and the whole reason for us to actually develop the Fung Global Institute and the Asian Global Institute is really to look at global issues, but from an Asian perspective. I don't think there are many think tanks around the world that are really doing that, and I think today, is really unique. Our topic today, I think, is really one of the best speakers that I know of in the world, who can actually talk about the rise of populism and right-wing nationalism in Europe, and importantly, its implications for Asia, for our region. I think it's very much on everybody's mind. It's very timely, and I think it's very, very important topic. Now, while right-wing populism might have been brewing for some time, most of us here in Asia took serious note of it only in 2016, after the Brexit referendum and the election of President Donald Trump. Since then, we have come to appreciate that the UK referendum outcome was not an isolated incident in Europe, nor was it motivated solely by internal conflicts in the ruling Conservative Party. In these past 2 years, we have seen further strengthening of far-right parties in other countries in Europe, notwithstanding the electoral defeat of the National Front in France. Voters across Europe appear to be abandoning traditional parties, even knowing that the result would be unstable government and a weakening of the rule-based international system. And that's something, as you all know, multilateralism is very close to my heart, something that I have actually really very hard time over, is how the rule-based international system is being weakened and weakened. Populism is rising even in prosperous countries like Germany, while extreme right populism has frightened historical associations. This year, for the first time since the Second World War, a right-wing party represented by the AfD party enters the German federal parliament. And that really, I think, is sort of, to me, a very interesting flag that one has to look at. Last Sunday, voters in normally progressive Sweden reduced the power of the establishment center-left and center-right, while boosting the power of a populist far-right anti-immigrant party. We in Asia are observers of these dramatic events without perhaps fully understanding their likely impact. We are puzzled as to what to make of the rejection of the values of an open society, globalization, and a rule-based multilateral system. We are concerned because we anticipate that these shifts could have far-ranging implications for our society and for our economic and political relationships in Europe. If there is one single topic that an organization like our Asian Global Institute should be addressing, is exactly this global trend, and really looking at its impact on Asia and what are the Asian perspectives on this very, very important global trend. Now, to help us make sense of these developments, we are privileged to have with us today Mr. George Papadriou, a speaker who is experienced European insider and internationalist, and importantly, an important and respected advocate for government transparency. After a distinguished political career in a number of ministerial positions, our speaker served as the Prime Minister of Greece during the outbreak of the country's financial crisis. I think we all saw George on the television really handling the crisis in Greece. And those were very poignant moments in world history. Under his leadership, Greece not only avoided bankruptcy at that turbulent time, but also started to apply structural reforms to modernize the country. In addition to dealing with the EU and its member countries on behalf of Greece, he played a key role when he was the country's foreign minister, before he was prime minister, in achieving a rapprochement with Turkey, between Greece and Turkey. And we all know about those very traditional conflicts. We were talking over lunch that that is probably a 2,000-year conflict. George was saying people in Greece will start talking about Alexander the Great. You can see how deep it is. And in achieving a rapprochement with Turkey, I think it's just a tremendous achievement for any individual to be able to do that in an environment that was so toxic, if I may say. So negotiations really was initiated by George that led to Turkey's EU candidacy in 1999, and eventually Cyprus' entry into the EU in 2004. In my mind, there is very few accomplishments in recent times that is actually that could sort of compare with that. And we look at some of our traditional rivalries and fights over islands and things like that in this region, and you can appreciate the achievements of something like that. Currently, George is president of the Socialist International. I'm beginning to understand that, this association, but it's an association which has actually a consultative status with the UN, but importantly, it is associated with more than 150 center-left parties, political parties in the world. And many parties like the LDP in Japan, the Congress Party in India, is a member of this particular union. And George is heading that. He is also co-chair of the Democratic Alignment, a coalition of the center-left parties in Greece. Now, the one thing that in my mind really distinguishes George, is not only a tremendous leader, tremendous politician, but really as an internationalist. And in the midst of all this, in the midst of all the trends that we see today in the world, many of which are frankly very disturbing, and in the midst of this pressure on the multilateral system, our values and our rule-based system, he is a strong advocate of thinking about a new multilateral system that will be fit for purpose in today's world and for the future, and would stop this downward spiral of really turning things into inward-looking nationalism that would lead us down a zero-sum game, which will be very, very bad for all of us. So with that, I'm sorry I took so long. That might be longer than your speech, but I thought it was important to introduce George. Ladies and gentlemen.